my name's Jenny Miller. I'm the Domestic Abuse Service Manager at Rochdale Connections Trust, and I'm here today with a lady who is going to share her story. So, hi, Shani, do you want to tell us a little bit about you?
Yeah, I'm Shani. I am 29 and I have 5 beautiful children.
So, what about your family makeup? What makes your family?
I grew up with my mum and my stepdad, who I class as my real dad, just with myself. But I do have 2 brothers and 2 sisters, and I'm the middle child. And then I've got my 5 children.
Lovely. So, what's your story about? How did it begin? And what happened to you?
My story is about abuse. My story began when I was a child. I was abused significantly by a family member and by other people close to the family. And then when I became 17, I got in my first domestic abusive relationship, which almost seen me lose my life on multiple occasions. I managed to leave that. And then when I was 23, I got into another abusive relationship, which wasn't as bad as the first one, especially despite everything that happened following. But that's where my life unravelled.
So, if I could just take you back a little bit, when you said that wasn't as bad, give me an insight into what you mean by that for anybody listening.
With my first abusive relationship, I dealt with physical violence majority of the time. It started off every couple of weeks, and that started when my second born child was about 3 weeks old, when I had my hair ripped out. But then I had knives held at me. I was scalded by boiling hot water. I had my ribs broke. I had my jaw broke. One of my wisdom teeth was smashed into 14 pieces because it hit me that hard. So the physical abuse was very intense, but then there was also financial abuse because he was spending all my money for the children on drugs. So then I turned to gambling so that I could feed my children. There was significant emotional and psychological abuse, which apparently started because he was cheating on me and he couldn't deal with the fact that he was cheating, so he took it out on me, which is barbaric. But then with my second abusive relationship, it was mainly psychological and emotional. There was very, very little physical violence between us. There was the odd occasion, which unfortunately has left me with permanent health conditions, such as fibromyalgia. It made me deaf in one ear because the trauma was that bad. And then my son died because of the violence, but I never seen that violent side of him, and it became apparent that he was being violent to my children whilst I wasn't present.
So while you was in this relationship and all this psychological abuse, how did you kind of get through the day? What kind of things would you do?
I really struggled to get through the day because in the March my granddad had died and I'd grown up with him, so me and him was immensely close. So I was grieving really, really bad. The day my granddad died, I think it was about half hour later, I found out that my ex was cheating on me. But I just let it slide because I had my other stuff to deal with, but I got to the point where I couldn't get out of bed. My children were saying, Mum, you need to do this, Mum, do that. And my children was coaching me through the day just so that I could get by. I didn't know at that point how to be a mum, and I just physically couldn't function. The depression was that bad that the housework never got done. I didn't interact with the children the way that I thought that I should. Well, it's not even the way I thought, it's the way that I definitely should have done.
So what about support? Did you have any support at that time?
I had my mum and my dad, but they wasn't aware of the abuse that was going on because my ex kept telling me that he would physically harm them if they was to get involved. So I felt very isolated and alone. In my first abusive relationship, my ex's mum was actually aware of the abuse.
Yeah.
And she said, as long as you keep talking to me, I won't tell anyone and it'll be our little secret. So she participated with her son to keep that abuse quiet.
What do you think she meant by that?
She put her son into care when he was younger, and they'd had a very unstable relationship. So she was really worried that he was going to stop talking to her because they didn't have that much of a good bond. So she bribed him to keep a relationship with him, but she knew what was going on and did nothing.
So how did that make you feel?
Alone. I had 2 small children at the time, and there was one incident where he chased me out in the street and he battered me in the middle of the street. And the neighbours come out and they all watched.
They didn't intervene?
Not one person intervened. There was men out there that was bigger and stronger than him, but they abused their partners. So they just stood there and watched. My kids were screaming. So I ran about 15 minutes. I had 2 children with just the clothes on. I had nothing on my feet and I ran barefoot across the estate where I lived at the time just to get away from him.
So what was going on in your mind at that point?
Sheer panic. I had no one that I could really turn to. At that point, I wasn't speaking to my mum due to the abuse that I suffered when I was younger, not at my mum's hands, but at that time, I thought my mum should have known because she was my mum. But I don't feel like that anymore. But yeah, I had nobody to turn to. And then he got arrested. And when he was arrested, the police bailed him to the family home. And I said, well, where are me and my children supposed to go? They said, that's not our problem. They kicked me and my children out so the perpetrator could have the house.
Is this the first relationship?
Yeah.
Yeah, the first abusive man.
Yeah. And then with the second one, he just always threatened my family. I wasn't allowed any communication with his family because he thought that I was going to turn his family against him. I had no need to do that. I think because of my previous experiences and the fact that I was never believed, not even by the courts, from my first abusive relationship, that I really struggled on where to turn to for support because it was never offered to me the first time around, and I was only 17 and then 23, so I was still very young and very vulnerable myself.
So over a period of 6 years, it was pretty much kind of just ongoing trauma, confusion, upset, crying out but not getting the help or not feeling listened to or as though you was, believed.
Yeah, definitely, because the first abusive relationship, he had grown up in Kershaw, had a social worker, and they had to do checks to make sure that the children were safe. And I disclosed while he wasn't there to the social worker that this man was abusing me. I begged them for help, and I got a report through the post a few weeks later saying everything's fine, no concerns, despite me actually asking for help. When I finally managed to get away from him, I begged the courts for help, and all he got was a suspended sentence and to pay me a fine. And he actually rang me and he was like, will you pay the fine to yourself? And honestly, words can't describe the cheek. But then I took him to family court because he tried to kidnap our child that we had together. So I took him to court for a prohibiting steps order and a restraining order. I was granted both, but he was given supervised contact. When I explained to the judge that I didn't want him to have contact because I felt that this man was dangerous and that he could pose a danger to my child, the judge said to me that I was the bad one because I wasn't doing what was in the best interest of my son, and just because he had harmed me, it didn't mean that he would ever harm a child.
Okay. So, very traumatic, and I can hear that in your voice.
Yeah.
Moving forward, you'd had 2 bad relationships over a period of 6 years.
Yeah.
Where did you then go? How did you move forward? What happened next?
I came to Rochdale Connections Trust.
Okay.
That literally is where the next part of my story starts after my son died. I started doing the freedom courses, which I didn't even know they existed at the time. I've done the parenting and the respectful relationships and the groups and everything else that RCT does. And I did the counselling. Sorry.
All right. It's all right, don't worry.
So soft, aren't I?
Don't be daft.
But yeah, I can honestly say if it wasn't for the support that I got from RCT, I wouldn't be alive today.
So how would you sort of like put that across to other people then? What was you feeling? So you was coming to groups and you were getting involved and you were learning and building your awareness up, and what else was it doing for you?
It was letting me know that I wasn't alone.
Okay.
Because there's so many times when you're abused that you think nobody else is going through it, that people won't understand, and then you come here and people actually understand. I'd been looked at as the villain, and in social services eyes I was looked at as bad as the perpetrator for so long that yous made me feel like I was just human.
Yeah.
Rather than being this awful person that, people should probably avoid. So yeah, you've given me my self-esteem back and my confidence, and I think I'm doing better.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
So how long time period have you been doing like programs and learning? Because I know you've done other things outside of RCT, haven't you?
Yeah, I had a lot of things going on at one point outside of RCT, with different organisations being involved. But I've been receiving all the support that I've had for the past 5 years. It hasn't been continuous support. Sometimes I've taken breaks between just because I've needed to for my own sanity. But yeah, I still receive the support from RCT.
So what then give you that kind of ability to think, okay, that's then. I'm moving forward, I've moved forward, I'm now ready to kind of get into either a volunteer role or a working role. What was that transition? How did that happen?
I think it happened very naturally, and because of the amount of things I've done with RCT and my passion after everything I've been through is trying to help people who've been in similar situations. So, yeah.
So what did you do first? Because I remember you coming on on a training course, not for like a survivor of or a victim of.
Yeah, I did the peer mentoring course originally. Sorry, I did the peer mentoring course originally, so that I could support women from the Freedom Programme who have been or still are experiencing domestic abuse.
Okay.
And then it just progressed from there.
Very good. You turned to gambling at one point to feed your children. So what kind of impact did that have on you and your family at that time?
It had a significant impact. I think at that time, I genuinely believed I was doing the best of a bad situation. Mm-hmm. Where in reality I was spending money we didn't have, hoping to win money that we needed.
What kind of gambling did you do?
Scratch cards.
Right.
I was spending sometimes in excess of £30-40 a week on scratch cards. Sometimes it'd be over £100 a week on scratch cards, just depending on what bills need paying, how much food I had in the house. And I just wanted to treat the children. And then when that didn't become sustainable, I then turned to payday loans to be able to afford the gambling. And it was a downward spiral. Mm. And then as soon as I left that relationship, I didn't touch scratch cards for years. Mm. And I'll still gamble now, but I do it for fun, not through necessity. Okay. And that's the difference.
Because some people might think, well, if you didn't have enough money to feed your children, then how can you spend £30-40 a week? So what kind of is going through your head at that time when you're kind of chasing?
It was just pure desperation. I was only 17 at the time. I weren't even old enough to gamble. And so many people always looked down on me of you can't be a good mum, because I had my first child when I was 15. And there was always that stigma of teenage parents and you can't afford to feed your children. And I'd been working, and even when I was working, I was paying for the children to be in nursery, and he was still spending all the money, so then I couldn't afford to keep up with the nursery fees. And I just wanted to try and provide the children for good life, so sometimes I'd borrow money off friends or family. They didn't know what was going on. They never asked questions. I think if they had asked questions, I could have possibly have got out of the situation a lot earlier, especially if I felt that I could open up to that person. But looking back now, I made the wrong decisions. And I'm fully aware of that, because that £30-40 a week was there for the sake of the children. And don't get me wrong, more often than not, I won more than what I actually spent. So I was in a better position to be able to buy the children, a treat, or buy them the food or new clothes or whatever they needed.
So it's like the thinking gets distorted, doesn't it? Because you get your wins, and then you can afford, I don't know, them to buy them new trainers or whatever, and then you lose, so you're chasing that loss by the loans or the loan, the lending off family and friends.
Yeah.
But it's kind of, if I'm hearing you right, it's kind of that, well, I need that to be able to afford that, but your thinking goes more about that addiction, because it is an addiction, isn't it? Did you see that as kind of an addiction?
I do now. I think at the time when you're very consumed, I think it's very difficult to spot the signs.
Yeah.
I think I was aware that something wasn't quite right, but I don't think I ever placed it on an addiction.
Yeah.
But yeah, looking back now, I was addicted, and then that came back after my son died and my children was removed and put into care. I was then spending my full rent money on raffles, and that addiction came back. That only lasted about 6 months, but it's 6 months where I almost lost everything again.
Yeah.
Because it became a coping mechanism, but I don't really gamble anymore.
No.
I probably buy a scratch card once a month.
Just for the fun?
Yeah, just for the fun of it. If I lose, I lose. If I win, I win. If I can't afford to do it, I don't buy it.
So, what would you say if there's anything you would change if you could go back? What would it be and why?
That's a very difficult question to answer, because if I hadn't have been through the things I've been through, I wouldn't be the person that I am today. I also wouldn't have the 5 most beautiful children to walk this earth. But I think for me, if I could go back and change anything, it would be after I give birth to my twins.
Mm-hmm.
And I would never have got back in that relationship. And I would have stayed on my own with the children, and I'd have raised them.
So what kind of learning have you got from it all then? I mean, you've given me a little bit of an insight there. Overall, throughout your life, what learning, what have you learned from all these experiences?
I think the first thing I've learnt more than anything is to not try to be so independent. It's okay to ask for help, because that's where I have always struggled. And I always feel like I'm a burden to people, whereas now I'm happy to be that, but I'm not even a burden. If you want to help me. If you don't. But I do think above anything, that's the one thing I've learnt, because it's where I've messed my life up so many times, and I think I could have got out of so many situations if I felt like I could turn to people and not be ashamed of struggling. I always found that shame there, and I think I've also learned my own strength.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you that in a second, but do you feel that you're a strong person?
Yeah, more than anything. I think everything that I've been through, a lot of people may not have come out of the other end. And I know I nearly didn't so many times, and there were so many times I wish that I didn't. But looking at where I am now in the position that I'm in, I do feel like I've got that strength and I've got that resilience to be able to move forwards in life.
Great. What about Rochdale, living in Rochdale? Has Rochdale helped you in any way?
I think it has, because I had good friends growing up, a lot of which I am still friends with to this day. So I've my best friend as well, she's from Rochdale, and never would have met her. But I think it's just the professions that you get in Rochdale, and I think without those and the places of RCT and then secondary care for mental health, I don't think I'd be in the position that I am now. Especially because I very nearly became an alcoholic after my son died, because I didn't touch anything after he died until his funeral, which was about a month and a half after his death. And then I drank at his funeral, and I became that drunk I literally fell off the steps and everyone was laughing at me. And I realised how much that numbed my pain. I didn't think of it. And then it became the next day, and it was just, oh, I'll just have this drink today and I won't have one tomorrow. But then it became a daily thing. I think that lasted for about 2 weeks, and I just got to the point I was like, what are you doing? And I then put pictures of my children up everywhere, and they then became my motivation.
Got you.
So without Rochdale, I wouldn't have had any of that in place. Yes, I wouldn't have experienced the things that I probably have experienced, but there is nothing to say that I wouldn't. But I also wouldn't be in such a strong position now.
So what do you think your friends and family, how would they describe you?
Brave.
Wow.
Strong. Courageous. And it's things that they tell me all the time, because they know that with my mental health, and even like the effects of the abuse affecting my confidence and my esteem, I kind of need that positive encouragement, just so that I know that I'm doing a good job. So every single day they'll always tell me how great they think I'm doing or how amazing I am. It's quite embarrassing, really.
Well, it's nice to hear though, isn't it?
It is. It's especially after everything that's happened. They could have quite easily have turned their backs and walked away.
But they didn't, because they love you.
They better had.
What words of advice would you offer to someone who was going through what you've been through?
I think it's that there's always support there. Sometimes it's so difficult, especially when you're in such a bad situation, to know where to turn for help. And people get scared, especially of turning to people who are professional, especially social services or the GP or anywhere. But looking back now, if I'd have gone to them, my son would probably still be alive. My kids would probably still be in my care. And I just don't want people to make the same decisions and choices that I made, because I don't think you can always understand or rationalise your own decisions. So look for someone else who can have an impartial view of what you're going through, and then they can sit down and they can be like, listen, this is what I think you're experiencing, this is how we can help you, because without that you're trapped.
That sounds really good advice. Has there any woman inspired you, a Rochdale woman or worldly woman?
Every single woman in this building.
Oh.
Stop it. But yeah, I know a lot of people's stories, and I just see the strength that you all have.
Thank you, Shani. That has been a really enlightening and privileged experience for me, and I just wish you to just carry on going onwards and upwards in your life, because you're amazing.
Thank you. And thank you for listening.